Should I start recording now?
You have to. Okay.
Recording in progress.
My name is Josey Wiggins. Today is April 14th, 2023. The time is 10:16 a.m. We are at the Pewaukee VFW. I'm interviewing Chris Cook, who was born on March 6, 1969 in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and was a staff sergeant in the Army, as well as the Air Force Reserves, and served as a medic. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. So to start things off, can you just tell me what you were doing before you entered the service?
Sure. I actually was a junior in high school, and I was just working my way through school, kind of unsure as to what I wanted to do. I knew that if I wanted to have any more additional education, that it would probably be a really good idea to learn some responsibility, and therefore I kind of moved forward with looking into the service, into the military. So yeah, I kind of did that on my own without any prompting of any family members. Went and kind of talked to some of the different branches, and then I had settled on getting involved with the United States Army. So did that. I actually started to do that as I was a junior in high school, just knowing that financially I wasn't going to be able to afford any secondary education
Right.
without maybe the help. So
Did you have any family members that were in the military?
I did. Long family, much like a lot of us. Grandfather that actually served in World War II in the Navy. Um, my dad, Thomas Cook, actually was also in the Army. He did serve during the Vietnam era, but was actually not deployed to Vietnam. Um, and also, my father-in-law, actually, Marty Hudai, is a Marine Corps, actually served in Vietnam as well. And so, those are some folks that I actually really look forward and look up to, and set really good examples of folks that I knew in my circle of influence to move forward with joining the military.
Right. And what were you kind of expecting when you joined?
I think you watch the recruitment videos, and it all looks like it's high speed, low drag. Every day is full of fun, and I say that kind of jokingly. And truthfully, when I went to basic training, my basic training was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, in the late '80s, and I was lost. I came from a small town. I grew up in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. Kind of knew everybody, and then you go to an environment like that where you actually become your social security number, your service number, and you just kind of get intermingled and intermixed with people from all over the United States, and I truly felt like a fish out of water. It was an interesting experience.
So once you got there, tell me about your early weeks of training and kind of how you adapted to military life.
I think adapting. I think you're kind of forced to adapt to the environment. You have to learn how to obviously get along with other people. It was a shock. I was used to being really close with my family, and then you get sent far away to. And I, like I said, in Fort Jackson, coming from Wisconsin, that was kind of a hike for us. And so it was interesting to have to learn to get along with other people, and in the environment where you're being told what to do. And as a younger person, I was maybe a little bit of an anti-authority as a younger person, and I really had to learn how to manipulate and mold my mind to fall in line with the mission, vision, and values of the military. And so there was some challenges there. It was difficult at times, and I truthfully got quite homesick. I missed my family. I have a really good organic family. As I had said earlier, I have a younger brother that was in the military, and it was really hard to leave them and then be and put in this environment where you're being told what to do, how to do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah. Um, so can you just tell me when you were deployed to Iraq?
I actually was, I say fortunate now, but I was fortunate to be deployed to Iraq in 2003. And that was actually when I was part of the Army Guard. And in that environment, I actually was deployed, and we actually were sent to Fort Drum, New York, which is a little desolate base that's really, really close to the Canadian border. And we were actually sent there, my unit, in order to do essentially like a train up where you touch up on a lot of your combat related skills. As a medical provider during that time, we obviously worked on our medical training, our trauma response, and then also doing education to the other soldiers in our unit on what we called was called buddy care, self-aid buddy care, where you learned how to take care of yourself and then also learn how to take care of your buddies, both men and women, to make sure that we were doing the best thing we could. Should we have encountered any hostilities, that we would do the best for them to ensure that they would be safe, they'd be able to come home. So that was probably one of the more challenging aspects of the deployment. Um, yeah, so we worked through there through most. It was the ironic thing about being in Fort Drum was that we were going to Iraq where it's 100 degrees, and Fort Drum, I think at some point it was 20 to 30 below zero.
Wow.
That we were actually training in and then getting ready to deploy to Iraq. So that train up, I think we spent about 8 weeks there. My memory serves me correct. And essentially we were preparing, we loaded equipment. Again, we made sure that we had appropriate clothing. That was kind of a big deal. Again, you're wearing like wool clothes, big parkas, and then you get sent to Iraq when it's super hot.
Yeah, a big
So
change.
you change, you get there, and all of a sudden you realize that most of the clothing that you were issued, it's too hot. So you actually had to get like a reissuing of clothes. So it was a shell shock. I mean, I was very impressed by how the military, the industrial complex of the military really took care of us. Clothing, food, lodging, things like that were actually really well. I think they were really well taken care of, or I was felt really well taken care of when I was actually deployed.
Yeah. And where were you initially sent in Iraq?
I was originally sent to this. It was called BIAP. Well, originally when you get in the country, you're in Kuwait, and you spend a period of time in Kuwait to do additional training or to become acclimated to the environment. So that was essentially a military base. Actually, I was at a place called Camp Virginia, and that was in the middle of nowhere. And there was porta potties and portable water drinking facilities, portable shower facilities, and essentially we stayed out in the desert for that period of time to do more training. And also, all of our gear, all of our equipment was actually transported over on a ship. So then we had to go to the port, and we all had to offload all of our equipment off the ship and then make sure that it was functional, that it was in working order. And we drove it back to the base in the middle of the desert. And then that's where we kind of loaded things up and we prepared. And then we subsequently convoyed from the area in Kuwait, and we actually then went to Baghdad, is where I was originally deployed to.
Right.
So we spent quite a bit of time in Baghdad, and that's where kind of everything kind of set in motion for me when I was deployed.
Right. And what was your role there in Baghdad?
I was actually a medic. I worked with a medical company, and what we did was we set up essentially like an aid station that received casualties, that received injured soldiers, or any service member for that matter. And we also took care of the indigenous population of people that were there. So not only did we have a response to take care of the traumatically injured people, but we also had like sick call, which would be where they could actually come in and be seen by the medical staff. And we also had physicians that were with us. So we were providing medical care not only to the soldiers and service members, but we were also providing medical care to in my case, it was mostly Iraqis.
And so how did the local Iraqis treat you initially?
I think because I was involved in the invasion really early on, the reception that we received from the folks in Iraq it was very overwhelming. They were very positive about having the mixing and intermingling with the civilian population or the military folks. It was actually, we would drive by and they'd be giving us the peace sign, and they were, I think they went out of the way to be very cordial. I think as time went on, they became, I think, concerned and perhaps maybe a bit irritated that we were spending a lot of time in their country.
Right.
So it was a unique dynamic because we were there, obviously, or I was there in my mind to do the right thing and to help these people. But I think, like anybody else, I think that I think they felt like we kind of weren't out a welcome.
Right. And then how the Iraqis kind of treated you, did this change as you moved from city to city?
It didn't so much for me because in my particular case, a few things that happened once we had moved up into Iraq. We were originally located at the airport, which was originally Saddam Hussein International Airport. And since they obviously, we took over that airport, we actually, like once we were there, we pretty much set up camp. and we were there to kind of make sure that we were treating the soldiers there and things of that nature.
Yeah.
If that answer your question.
Kind of. Where
Fair enough.
Where was the second location that you were?
Oh, the second location is we started at the airport, and then we moved to another place, which was called Camp Liberty, and that was a little bit down the road. That had a more robust medical facility. We actually saw quite a few more casualties, and the casualties were more Americans. We saw quite a few Americans that would receive really severe burns related to explosions, mostly explosions. So, taking care of those folks. And what we did is we did it the best we could to mitigate and treat their injuries. And then we actually used helicopters, and we flew them by helicopter to a more robust medical treatment facility, which was actually downtown Baghdad, is where we sent them. So that was actually, and both locations were very close to each other.
Right.
One of the things that I failed to mention at the first location, I actually was tasked to a different area on the base, and it turned out that I spent 3 months being part of a medical team that took care of Saddam Hussein.
Right.
And also early on, many people may remember that there was a deck of cards when we first went to Iraq. They actually gave soldiers and service folks a deck of cards. And on the deck of cards, it actually had the faces of all the high value detainees that the United States was essentially looking for to hold them accountable for whatever atrocities they may have committed or actually been accused of committing. All those, the entire deck of cards was located at the same facility that I was working at, with the exception of, I think, 2 or 3. I know that Saddam's kids, Uday and Qusay, actually met their fate with a gunfight with some special forces folks. And I believe that there was a general that may have perished because of cancer. Other than that, they had everyone else at this detention facility. And essentially, I like to call it, it was like I worked at a nursing home for the rich and infamous, because they were older folks.
Yeah.
And through all this, we provided them medical care. We made sure that they were actually being fed accurately. One of the things that I guess I'm proud to say is that we worked really closely with the International Red Cross, and they were very astute about making sure that they were being treated well, that they were being fed culturally appropriate food, and that they were also maintaining weight. But we would run into some of the detainees that would go on hunger strikes. So it was like, it kind of created an environment where we're like, we wanted the Red Cross to recognize that we were doing the very best we could to take care of them. But quite honestly, we kind of ran into some of that where, they didn't want to eat, or they didn't find the food appropriate. And so we actually had culturally appropriate food brought in, which was actually an MRE. An MRE is a meal ready to eat, which was something that as a service person, it's a plastic thing you tear open and it has food in it. They actually made MREs for folks that adhere to the Islamic faith. So it had things that were appropriate for their religion. And so they ate that, and they also received, real food. But that was a really interesting part of my first 3 months while I was there. And then I was called to a cell that was on the other side of this facility. And then I actually ended up drawing the blood of Saddam on several occasions. So I kind of did a little face-to-face care. And the thing that was most interesting is I worked with a physician who was at the base, and he was an obstetrician, so he delivered babies. But he was Saddam's primary doctor because he was the highest ranking official in the area. And while we were there, he actually got his 1-star to be a general. So he was the primary medical provider, and then I actually worked with him to help. And I think I was the only other medical provider that took care of him during our 3 months that I was there. So, something that I can look back in my time that I touched history, to take away from my first 3 months while I was there.
Did you have any particularly unique experiences when you were treating these high value detainees? Anything that kind of stands out to you?
I think what would happen is that over time, because we would interface with these folks on a daily basis, your name tape, on your military uniform is my last name was Cook. So they would always call me Mr. Cook. And then they'd always would say that I had power, and which I had very little, if any, power. But they always thought because I was on the outside of where they were locked that I had power. And they would ask for things that were not necessarily well, I know that they were not authorized to have.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be like, well, I can't do that for you. And they'd be like, but Mr. Cook, you have the power. It was just interesting how they would try to bargain with
Mm-hmm.
you. And I remember one of the things that I did find funny, and I really wish I would have kept this, but I went into they had some rooms that maybe housed 10 detainees. Some of them were by themselves in cells,
Mm-hmm.
and then some were in group areas. And I went into one of the larger group areas, and they had taken a piece of cardboard and they took Skittles candy and they made a palm tree out of it.
Wow.
That was actually out of all these different colors of Skittles, and they gave it to me as a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of wish I would have kept it, but it's one of I think I probably ate it, but but my point being is that
Mm-hmm.
I mean that was maybe their small way of trying to. I like to think they were trying to be nice, but more importantly, I think they were trying to have some level of manipulation. They
Mm-hmm.
were guarded 24/7, and when the medical people came in, we were kind of looked as being maybe I don't the nice people, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe one other thing that was most memorable is that I remember one night we were all sleeping in our separate area. We got a knock at the door, and one of the guards came, and they had one of the detainees had chest pain.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get our gear on and we go over, and we have to all be badged in because it's a secure area. And I remember the detainee, again, I didn't speak in much Arabic. It was very rudimentary. And so we had an interpreter, and he was having crushing chest pain. And I had said to the general at the time, and I said, sir, I think he might be having a heart attack. And I think what kind of gave me a little bit of knowledge about that is previous to that, I had done quite a bit of work in the emergency department before my deployment. And so I was like, this seems really suspect. And so we offered to put him on a litter and carry him back to our little treatment area, and he refused. He wanted to walk. And so when we got him back to our treatment area, we laid him on a cot, and he was profusely sweating.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a little cardiac monitor, and I put it on him, and his rhythm, his cardiac rhythm was obvious that he was having a heart attack.
Wow.
And so it was like one of these things like, we need to get this guy out of here. And obviously I was there as a medical provider. And so we're giving care, regardless of who those individuals are. And this person needed more care than we could provide. And he subsequently cardiac arrested in front of us.
Wow.
And so one of the treatments that we used to do back in the days, we used to do this cardiac thump, which we no longer do it now, but back in the day, and I didn't have a defibrillator. So I literally, I hit this guy in the chest as hard as I could, thinking, and the idea behind that is that it may stimulate a little bit of electrical activity to make the heart start. Well, so I hit him really hard. It didn't work. And I looked at the general and I said, we need a defibrillator. Well, the only defibrillator in the campus of the prison was in Saddam's cell, right by his cell, because they worked really hard to make sure he stayed alive. So that general ran all the way on the other side of and more or less he brought the defibrillator back. We ended up shocking this guy. I ended up giving him some medication, and it was unsuccessful. So he was transported. We handed off folks to the Air Force, so they were able to deal with it. But like a few weeks later, we ended up having a criminal investigation. They came in and they actually interviewed all of us because I think they were looking to see if there was any abuse,
right?
In which, of course, there wasn't. And they had asked us, they said, do you know who this person was? And we were actually told not to pay attention to who they were. So for people that are a little older, they would remember this guy's name was Abu Abbas, and he was actually the terrorist that took over the Achille Lauro, which was a cruise ship. And he actually killed an American, that was actually Leon Klinghoffer, who was a wheelchair-bound American, and he actually killed him and pushed him over the side.
Wow.
So they just were kind of interested to see if we knew who he was and would we maybe have not provided him care, but in that case we did. So a few really poignant things that occurred in the first kind of 3 months I was there.
Right. Can we talk about some of the injuries that you sustained while in Iraq?
Sure. The first, so about the first 4 or 5 months I was doing a lot of that care, and about the 8th month, one of the things when we moved to the second base, Camp Liberty, that I had mentioned, we had a security team, and my commander had, basically we had 3 Humvees, and what our responsibility was is we would drive to other locations to check on other units, or other folks within our company had been parsed out to other areas. And so we would drive in our Humvees. They were up armored. Actually, they were really not up armored. Not like the armored vehicles are now. We basically had a ballistic windshield. And we basically stacked sandbags on the floor, and that was all in the event if you were to hit like an IED or an improvised explosive device. And we would drive around. Well, we opted to go on this particular day, which ironically was September 11th 2004. We were driving from, it was called Camp Liberty. We were driving to the Green Zone, which was, I think it's probably about 7 or 8 miles away, and it's basically on a 6-lane road with a really large median in the center, and it was desert, and there was on both sides of it was buildings and people's homes and whatnot. Well, we were driving on the road. Just about where we got to where the checkpoint was for the green zone, we were stopped by some American forces, and they had said that they had found a bomb that was implanted in this side of the road. And so we opted to, instead of turning around and maybe going back to base, we opted to stay where we were at. Everybody got out of their vehicles, and we provided a 360-degree perimeter security with our weapons in the event that obviously something were to happen. I was standing on the roadside, meaning there was, we had people in my company or in this small security detail that were kind of on the median side, and I was kind of standing on the roadside. So literally it would be like standing on the curb. And looking down the road, we were just kind of watching all this traffic, and I noticed quite a ways away there was a vehicle that pulled out of the flow of traffic, and it actually was driving at our position. And my first thought was, man, I'm going to get run over. I mean, that's what you would think here in the United States. If you don't move out of the way, you're going to get run over. And I don't really know what made me think more about it, but I ended up, I'm like, we're going to get killed. And so I raised my M16 and I actually shot him through the windshield twice, or I shot at his head twice. And the car immediately detonated probably 30 yards from where I was standing. The blast actually threw me to the ground up against another vehicle, and I had a very brief period of what I thought was unconsciousness. I mean, I believe that's what it was, and I kind of came to, and I remember when I looked up, I couldn't see very well because I had like ballistic goggles on, and they were completely scratched. So I kind of moved them off my face, and I grabbed onto like a guard on a vehicle to stand up, and I couldn't stand up. And then, and all of a sudden I was like, I didn't feel any pain at that time. And then when I looked down, my left leg was completely twisted around. And I could see that there was I could see the bone sticking out of my pants, and then I was bleeding everywhere. And I remember I was crying out for help, but I couldn't hear because of the blast. It's like I heard these muffled tones in my head, but I couldn't hear my voice, and I was kind of calling for help, and I kind of started crawling on my arms. And I remember kind of rolling over, and one of the things that is that we were provided tourniquets. And I didn't really take the time to learn how to use it because I'm a medic. I'm going to use it on somebody else. And lo and behold, I didn't realize I was going to have to use it on myself. And I kept it in this little area on my body armor. It's where we kept our sunglasses, or the cool folks, did anyways. And I took it out, and it was in a plastic wrapper. And I had no fine motor skills to actually get it out because I was the adrenaline rush. I was so I ended up using my teeth. I got it out of the wrapper, and I put the tourniquet on my left leg, and I put it right below my knee. And I believe I put it on the best I knew how without really having any instructions on it.
Right.
I'm a fairly intelligent person, but under stress, I think you become a big puppy. It's like I subsequently put the tourniquet on. I believe it stemmed the flow of bleeding. And then I had 2 other soldiers that came, and they actually grabbed me, and they kind of dragged me to safety around another vehicle. And at that point, they sat me up. I was, I could breathe, but I remember I started coughing up a lot of blood. And then I'm like, I think I might have sustained like a chest injury. Like I thought maybe and so I was coughing up like frothy blood. And they were kind of checking my body over, and I had a piece of metal sticking out of my back. And I just had said, please just leave it in there, right? If the hole is plugged, let's keep it plugged. And then they immediately kind of got me on a litter, and then I was transported to the green zone, which wasn't all that far away. And then I actually received further care there. The metal that was in my back was part of the car. And so they took it out. Fortunate, I didn't have a lung injury. Most of the blood was actually coming. I had a shrapnel through my face and through my nose, and that's where most of the blood was coming from. So I was very fortunate the metal that went in my back did not go into my chest cavity. So I sustained a near amputation of my left leg, a fracture in my right leg. I had flash burns, a traumatic brain injury, and I guess that was enough, right? And then I ended up having surgery right in Baghdad, and then I was evacuated out of the country by the military, went to Landstuhl hospital in Germany, had some surgeries there. It was the first time that I remember. Actually, I take it back. When I was in Baghdad, I was waiting to go to surgery, and I was still conscious. And I remember that someone handed me a phone, and they asked me if I wanted to call my family. And I called. Someone called the number, and I remember my mom picked up, and my mom said, "What happened?" And my dad was on the other line, and my dad was crying. And I'm like, I was blown up, and I said I had to kill somebody. And my dad, I heard my dad go, "That a boy," but and then I just said, I'm going to be okay. I don't know if I'm going to keep my legs, but I said I'm going to be okay, or at least one leg. And so, obviously I love my parents. I'm really close to them. So that was like, they heard it from me, which was, that's the modern technology, went to surgery. There, they ended up putting like this erector set on my leg to try to save it. And then I ended up going back to Landstuhl. And then from Landstuhl, I went to Walter Reed, and I spent the better part of 2 years being assigned to Walter Reed, and then going through multiple surgeries. And they saved my leg. And then I went through like rehabilitation, psychological rehabilitation. The brain injury, I mean, I still probably have some remnants of that today, probably a little bit of short-term memory, a little bit of recall things. But probably the most lasting thing is the mental health aspect of going through something like that. And I had some survivor's guilt. There was nine soldiers that were wounded. Fortunately, no American soldiers were killed. There were some Iraqi civilians that were in proximity of the car when it exploded, and they perished in the blast. But I really had this. I guess I really questioned why I lived, because of the proximity of this blast. I mean, the photographs of the crater are impressive. There was nothing left of this car except for the engine block, and I was really close, and I really had a hard time understanding why I lived, and coming to terms with understanding that I obviously I was being watched over. So that's it's emotional, obviously, but it's important to talk about. Some of the lasting effects, you still think about it today. And I think about how fortunate I am to be here. I'm thinking about, in order to do this interview, and how fortunate I am to hopefully have a positive impression on folks in the future.
Right. Yeah. So how were you able to kind of like transition from military life to civilian life, and how did your work in Iraq help you with your work here, especially in like the fire department?
It's a good question. I mean, I actually was fortunate enough that I was able to put myself through school, and so I obtained a nursing degree. So I've been a nurse for quite a few years, and it was an interesting transition. I didn't really have a transition problem or an issue. I had a personal problem. I was really great professionally, but I would go home and I would be living in a nightmare. And I had been married once before, and that was not a successful marriage. I chose to make choices to isolate myself and to not be present for anyone. And that was a hardship in life in general. I mean, I excluded my family, I excluded my friends, because I felt alone and I didn't want any help. Fortunately, I didn't utilize crutches like drugs or alcohol. I used isolation. And then I ended up, I was very fortunate that I got hooked up into the Veterans Administration. And more importantly, I ended up working with the Vet Center, which is kind of a little offshoot of the VA. And I met a fantastic counselor who was a former door gunner in Vietnam. And I credit that man for being very responsible for saving my life. In the fact that he spoke to me in a way that I understood. He called BS when there was BS, but he also was able to hand me a tissue when I cried. And I really give that man a lot of credit.
Yeah. What skills were you able to transfer from your time like as a medic to your work now?
I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, I work for the city of Pewaukee as an EMS chief. So I actually work in education. So I have not only the skills that I brought from the military, obviously things that I were able to attain in college, but I'm actually able to do education to the folks that are actually living and working in this community that we're very fortunate to be in, that are taking care of people. So there is a direct correlation. A little offshoot to that is that I've done a lot of education around the combat medical care and how valuable that is for civilians. Sadly, the way our world is, and with the way there's a lot of violence in the world, those same skills that I learned in the military are completely translatable to the civilian environment. And I've been fortunate enough to do that education since about 2008. I was teaching when I was walking around in a cane, so I still do that to this day. And so there's a direct correlation, and very fortunate to be able to do that.
Yeah. What do you consider to be the most important contribution of your service?
I think my most important contribution was to give selfless sacrifice to my country, without a doubt. That is, I don't know how much more explanation that needs. I was really fortunate to do that. And even through all of the injuries and all of the lasting effects that have, if I were to rewind that, I would re-enlist again today, because it has springboarded me into a much better place. I have a beautiful wife who is an absolute gorgeous woman that loves me with all of her heart. And I would have never met her had I not gone through this.
And what do you think are some life lessons that you learned from military service?
Having loyalty and respect, not only for other people, but more importantly, sometimes for yourself. And recognizing that, I think if you do put your mind to it, you can do it. Everyone has different obstacles in their life. I always have people that ask me for my service or thank me for my service. And I mean, I appreciate that. I much like all the comrades that I served with, I think the people we really need to thank most are the ones that didn't make it home. And so that's been obviously the most important thing, is having loyalty, respect, sense of duty, and understanding that you have to have an indomitable spirit to continue to move forward and push through life, and always try to leave this world a better place than the way you found it.
In closing, this has been an interview of Chris Cook regarding his service during the Iraq War. My name is Josey Wiggins, and the time is 10:47. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your
very much.
service.
I appreciate it. Thank you.